So if you know how to factoring, then solving a quadratic by factoring is 99% the same thing. Okay, so let's do a real quick review of the process for factoring. So again, always make sure that your equation is in standard form and always check for a greatest common factor, okay? Once you have that, then it's just multiplying the first and the last coefficients. Once you have that coefficient, list down all the combinations that could break apart that coefficient and find the magic combination that will hit that middle term. Once you have the combination, you can finish up your table and then just greatest common factor each row and each column, okay? So now I'm gonna show you guys the trick to solving each one of these. Again, we gotta make sure it's in standard form. So I'm gonna put everything to the left. I'm gonna add 7x to both sides and then subtract 20 equals 0. So the difference is we have an equal sign, which means it's an equation, which means we need to solve. Then I do exactly what I would with any other factoring, okay? I multiply those two, and then I list down all the combinations. When you get really good, you don't have to list down all the combinations, but it's good to just kind of get this procedure down, just in case you're not as good or you might miss a combination or two, okay? So these are all the pairs that multiply to give you 60. Now, which one of those could hit this 7 in the middle? So if I add or subtract, the only thing that could hit that 7 in the middle is this 5, 12 combination. More specifically, since it's a positive 7, this has to be a positive 12 and a negative 5. And once you have that, you can finish up your factoring. All right, so I would find the GCF of these two, and that's x. Biggest thing that goes into 12x and negative 20 is a positive 4 because this is a positive. GCF these two, and that's a 3x. Biggest thing that goes into these two, and that would be a negative 5. So if this was factoring, I have 3x minus 5 and x plus 4, and I'm done, okay? But at this point, because it's an equation, I'm only 99% done. I have to come up with my answers. So what are my answers? There's a little trick where when I'm left with just two things, my job is to make this equal to 0. So I would always subtract this or add if it was a subtract sign, and then divide by this number here. So the trick for me is always to do the opposite of this, opposite of C divided by B. Okay, so for this one, the opposite of this is 5 over 3. The opposite of this is negative 4 over this invisible 1. So 4 over 1. So these would be my two answers. Okay, that's it. Just jumping from here to here, hopefully will be somewhat automatic for you. Okay, so again, I got to put this in standard form. So if I did that, I would get 4x squared, add 6x to both sides, subtract 40 from both sides. The problem is I also had to look for GCF first. So I got to pull out that 2. That's going to shrink this down to 2x squared plus 3x minus 20 equals 0. So this is what I'm breaking apart. I start with my 2x squared, negative 20. Now I'm trying to hit this 3 in the middle. So that gives me negative 40. Again, when you get good, you don't have to list down all the combinations, but I will just because it's good practice, okay? All right, so which one of these combinations added or subtracted could hit that 3 in the middle? This seems like it's the only candidate, and in order to get a positive 3, I need a negative 5 with a positive 8. So negative 5x, positive 8x. Then the rest of it is just my GCF skills, so that's going to be x plus 4. This is going to be 2x minus 5. So again, if I factored, if all I asked you to do was factor, then this is, sorry, don't forget your original GCF. This would be your answer. But now, if I'm asking you to solve, that means I gotta get my final answers by setting each one of these to 0. So it's the opposite of this, over this, opposite of this, over 1. So there's my answer. This does not produce an answer because it doesn't have an x. So again, we only have an answer for each x parentheses that we see. So here are my two answers, okay? All right, at this point, why don't you guys take a look at these problems from your notes, pause the video, complete those, and then come back and check your answers. Welcome back. Let's take a look at how we solved this problem here. So again, got to make sure it's in standard form. So first thing I would do is I would subtract x from both sides and set the whole thing equal to 0. Once I have that, It's in standard form, check for GCF. There isn't any, then I could begin my factoring process. Okay. I need to hit that 1 in the middle. First of all, I'm going to multiply these two. 72, oh, that's kind of a pain in the butt. 172, 2 times 36, what else? 3 times 24, does 4 work? Yeah, 4 times 18. 5 doesn't work. 6 times 12 will give me 72. 7 doesn't work. 8 times 9, and that's it, okay? Because the next one would have been 9, then 12, then 18, so it's a horseshoe effect. So which one of these could hit that 1 in the middle? Well, these two seem to be the only candidate. In order to be a negative 1x, this has to be negative, this has to be positive. So positive 8x, negative 9x is my combination. Once I have my combination, then it's just a simple GCF. Biggest thing that goes into those two, biggest thing that goes into those two. GCF these two, and that's positive 4. And then hopefully you guys were able to get to this part here, which means you're really good at factoring. Now the final step to solve, opposite of this over this. So my first answer is negative 4/3, and then opposite of this, positive 3 over 2. So my final answers are those two. Okay. Let's take a look at 2D. If I take a look at this problem, once again, got to get into standard form. So I'm going to add 2x squared to both sides. This is still a positive 3x on the left. Then subtract 20 from both sides. So here it is in standard form. Check for GCF, there isn't any. So I can start filling out the first and the last part of my table. Now to get these two to complete the table, I multiply, so that's negative 40, 140, 220, 3 doesn't work, 4 times 10, and then 5 times 8. Which one of those could hit this 3 in the middle? This seems like it's the only candidate. So it's negative 5 and positive 8. That would hit that positive 3 in the middle. GCF each row and column. This is going to be a positive 4 because that closest box is positive. That's 2x, negative 5. So once again, 2x minus 5, x plus 4 is my factoring. Now I need to solve it. So opposite of this over this, opposite of this over this. And there are my answers. Okay. Let's take a look at your next example. Hopefully when you did this one, again, what I like to do is I like my x squared to always be positive. So I'm actually going to add 3x squared to both sides, and that's fine. So I have 3x squared plus 11x minus 4. Okay. GCF, there's nothing there. So I can start filling out my table. So 3 times 4 is negative 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And the only way I could get that 11 in the middle is using this one right here. More specifically, I need a positive 11, so a positive 12 and a negative 1 would work. And then it's just a matter of GCF. So remember, I told you guys that GCF is basically all factoring, okay? All factoring eventually boils down to just doing basic greatest common factor. Once I have these two, I'm done with the factoring, but I'm not done solving yet. Hopefully that's an easy jump. Opposite of this over this. Opposite of this over this, so 4 over 1. So there are my answers, okay? All right, last example. Let's take a look at this. Hopefully you guys were able to decipher the GCF for this one. So it is in standard form, but there is a GCF. I always like this to be positive, so my GCF should have been negative 3. Once I do that, this breaks down to 2x squared plus x minus 3. And this is what I'm breaking apart. So I have 2x squared, negative 3. Then multiply those two, that's negative 6. 1, 6, 2, 3. Which one of those could hit a positive 1 in the middle? Here it is. So I need a positive 3 and a negative 2. There you go. GCF everything, and we are virtually done. Again, this is positive because the closest box is positive. So when I factor, this is what I have. Don't forget this original negative 3. In fact, if I ask you to factor only, this would be your answer and you're done. But because it's an equal sign, that means we have to solve the equation. So my answer is opposite of this over this, so it's 1 over 1. Opposite of this over this, so that's negative 3 over 2. This one does not have an answer. Okay, it's the greatest common factor at the beginning just to help break these down a little bit smaller, but you only have an answer for every single x you see.